and welcome to Introduction to the BIA. I'm Michael Herrera, CEO, MHA Consulting, and I wanted to thank you for your time. The BIA, I first of all commend all of you for being here because for some of you, this may be your first BIA, or you may be one of those individuals who's done multiple BIAs. So I commend you here today to again, learn, to also at the end, hopefully ask some questions as to what's happening. What are some trends in the BIA, and what should I look for as I continue to do my BIA? I'm going to confirm some of your suspicions and let you know that, the BIA or the business impact analysis is not something always easy to do, especially if it's your first time. And I will tell you, there's just no one right way to do it. There's no one silver bullet in how to do it. You have different ways to do it based on the size, the complexity. Is your organization regulated, not regulated? So the BIA, again, we don't ourselves make it that easy. And I will tell you, you have a right to be somewhat afraid. I've had folks that have tried to do a BIA because, again, when you do a business impact analysis, you're very exposed. You have to expose yourself to management. You have to expose yourself to your business units. You're involving large parts of your company. So you have a lot of fears as you go and work with them and try to understand what they do. Are you doing it the right way? Are you not doing it the right way? Does the information come out right? Is management going to give you grief when you present the results? So again, in this BIA, it's a very intrusive engagement, whether you're doing it with your business units, technology, et cetera. So I understand your fears. And again, a lot of it, I have to honestly say that some of the failures we see out there, us as consultants, and those of us who have been in the industry, we are ourselves to blame. In a lot of cases, not yourselves, because sometimes we make the process too complex in order to complete. And then lastly, I'll tell you, again, there's a lot of us out there as consultants or software tools that always say it's easy to use. You really do need to know the BIA and how it works and how you want it to work at your organization so that when you do go out and potentially choose a tool or a process, it works for you and your company. So let's get started. I'm Michael Herrera, like I stated, been in business now at MHA Consulting for 19 years. Prior to that, I was with Bank of America, where I was a regional vice president and had the Southwest region. And over these 19 years now of running MHA, we've grown and now are a global consulting firm. Our average years of experience on our team is around 20 years, so we have a very senior level of staff. And as you can well imagine, in those 19 years, we had to develop a lot of our tools that were once Word templates or Excel. So we now also not only do consulting, but we have a complement of our SaaS or software as a service business continuity tools that includes our BIA tool, a tool to measure how compliant you are with standards, a tool to measure your risk that remains in your plan, and our newest tool, a way to serve as a repository. We have a tool now to map all your sites and hold all your plans together in one place securely. This gives you an idea as our very diverse client base that we worked with over the years. This is just a partial list of our clients. And in doing that, you can well imagine we have learned a lot about the business impact analysis. Some organizations, I will tell you, they will do it just to get it done and check the box off. Others, it's a very integral part of business continuity. It's either done annually or at least every 2 years. That's one of the questions we always get asked. How often should I do the BIA? Well, first of all, get your first one done. And typically you'll see most clients will do it every 2 years. We have some because they can justify it and they don't change much. It's every 3 years. So there's some will do it more often, some not as often based on what's required of them or not required of them. But in doing this, we've learned over time how to do the BIA. And I will tell you right now, in the way millennials are impacting the workforce, the way corporate America is working, the BIA can't be as intrusive. You have to get it done quicker. It has to get to the information a lot sooner. And again, they don't want it to take up a lot of time. So it has to be very concise, to the point, get over it, and move on with the next step. So why are you here? The business impact analysis is definitely the foundational step that incorporates all of your functions to analyze the impact of a disruption to those functions you're analyzing over any length of time. So that's very important. Remember, it's truly the foundational step. Because basically what you're doing in the BIA is taking a look at what business units perform, what are their functions, how they perform them, and what's the impact of not being able to perform them over any length of time you choose. It is a truly good way to also understand, what does your company do? I had a client of mine who said, I never learned so much about my company than I did when we did the BIA. Because truly you're going to each department of your organization, learning what they do, how soon it needs to be back up and running, what are the resource dependencies. In the end, you become extremely knowledgeable what your company does on a global enterprise level. So When you do a BIA, it is truly a fact-finding mission because you're going to use this information not only to develop the appropriate recovery strategies, but also to develop that recovery plan that they need in order to be successful should there be a disruption. And it also will give you a very, very clear idea. Should I have some downtime or an unplanned disruption? What's going to happen to my company? What processes or functions do we really need to be up in order to sustain our mission and ensure our stakeholders have the minimal impact? Because if you do the analysis right, you really get a good realistic understanding of what we do every day. And again, it's going to really help us build that recovery strategy. So you learn a lot from the BIA. But what we see often is that BIA, if it's not done properly, can take too long, doesn't get done, or doesn't provide the right information. So what can I expect when I do a BIA? First, you got to expect you learn how to organize the process, how to get my BIA questionnaires in order, and be able to conduct the BIA interviews. This is the most critical part that drives the rest of these listed here on the screen. You really need to learn, how do I organize it? What process and methodology is going to work for me? Whether I'm regulated or not, what's the process that I can use that still works for us? How do I prepare the right questionnaires? And again, as I stated earlier, less is more today. We've seen people come up with 10, 15-page BIA questionnaires. They're taking hours to complete. That doesn't work anymore. You need to prepare concise BIA questionnaires, whether it's in a tool or a template format, and make sure it works and it's quick and easy for people to complete. And what we've learned, I will tell you, BIA interviews are the best one-on-one, not remote, not handing out spreadsheets for people to complete. So that's really important. First thing you're going to learn about doing a BIA. Secondly, you're going to learn how to set priorities and understand how long can my company really operate without our functions, with our technology, our equipment, our suppliers. And sometimes you'll find that your company can go longer than it really does think it can. That's why it's so important in setting up the process and the methodology and the approach that it helps drive that quantification of really how long can we be down and how long are the right functions represented that need to really, again, make sure that we're aligned with our mission to continue operations. The next thing you're going to learn about doing the BIA, you're now going to understand specific financial and operational exposures. Really, how much money or lost revenue are we going to lose? Are we going to incur penalties and fees if we can't perform these processes or functions? What's the impact to our customers, or if we're a hospital, our patients? What's the impact to brand and image? You begin to quickly see in conducting the BIA, really, what are those exposures and when will they significantly increase over time based on what process has been impacted? And then lastly, out of the output that comes from number 1, number 2, and number 3, it really helps you build that roadmap because you now know in conducting the BIA what's critical, what isn't, what are my resource dependencies, and that all helps drive the development of that roadmap you need for recovery plans, for the strategies and the solution based on what's important or not important to the company. You learn, where do I really need to spend my time and my efforts to make sure that I put the right strategies and plans and testing for those functions that mean the most to us, and maybe not as much for those that don't. So you learn basically end-to-end what your company does, what's critical, what isn't, and how do it drive the roadmap for completion of strategies, plans, testing, etc. Some key terms, especially, and I apologize for those of you that have significant experience. We're going to go over some terms you probably already know, but for those that have never done a BIA, there's some key terms you do need to know. First of all, what business continuity? Remember, business continuity is just the strategic and tactical capability of the organization to respond to a disruption, whatever that may be. Business continuity, though, is kind of that management, is the umbrella over all of what you're trying to do at your company in advanced preparedness of a disruption. So it's the enterprise management. Think of business continuity management as an umbrella over all the other components I'm going to talk about. So we already talked about business continuity plan, which is really the documented collection of procedures that you have in place that takes the BIA into consideration and other components and builds really a collection of procedures, steps, and actions, and how would we respond to event. Business impact analysis, that's what we're talking about today. That is the identification of critical activities and systems to the survival and mission of your company. Threat and risk goes hand in hand. The threat and risk assessment goes hand in hand with the BIA. BIA tells me what is critical to my company to keep us running. The threat and risk assessment tells us what are the most relevant threats we need to be concerned, natural, human, technological, that could impact us and have an impact to us. And most importantly, the threat and risk assessment helps the BIA helping determine what are the strategies we need to use. So if we're in an area that has a high probability for natural events, that threat and risk assessment is going to tell us that. So when our BIA, when we help design strategies, It's going to help us design appropriate strategies based on the threats we've identified. Typically, a lot of people will have us do the BIA and then right after the threat and risk. So again, they do work hand in hand, but not enough people do the threat and risk assessment. And they should. They really should at least have a high level understanding what are the threats and risks, not only to their company, but their critical suppliers. What is a business function? So in the business impact analysis, we are analyzing or trying to determine what's the impact to our function, our business function, which really refers to the process, activity, or operation that is performed routinely by our business units. And we're analyzing each of those processes to get a very clear understanding of the processes and what they do and their dependencies. In the end, the BIA will help you determine for each business function and the resource dependencies its recovery time objective, or RTO. Fancy term for how soon does this function or the associated resources, whether that's systems or dependencies, need to be restored before impact to that and before the impact to the enterprise occurs. So remember, recovery time objective, just time frame, a process or function needs to be recovered before the company suffers some material impact. Recovery point objective. Now, this is probably one of the most difficult terms to get to again, use in the BIA as you try to help business functions understand their reliance on their critical computer systems and applications. But recovery point objective basically says, if I'm function A and I depend on systems 1, 2, 3, and 4 in order to perform that process, we're going to ask you, well, what's your recovery point objective? Well, what is that? It is the maximum data loss that you can experience in each of those systems before your process is impacted. Now, in today's world, we all know no one can lose data. We clearly understand that. And most people are, again, because our computer systems have taken over and technology's taken over, there's very few to no manual workarounds. So we have to ensure there's no way that we can enter data easily back into the system if it's down. So recovery point objectives, as we see, which is the maximum data loss I can sustain in a system, is really getting less and less and less to hours or minutes or no data loss. So that's a very key component of the BIA. Recovery strategies, recovery strategies are the solutions to recover those critical business function and associated dependencies. But I don't work on those until I know the RTOs and the RPOs. So I need the RTOs of the process and the systems as well as the RPO of the systems. That will help me identify the appropriate strategies, as well as be able to say, what are they going to cost? So very important to note. Here's some baselines. If you have to come up with strategies to recover functions or processes within 24 hours or less, that's going to be pretty expensive. You're going to need some near or real-time capabilities in place that are going to cost more because they're sitting there ready to go. Now, as you go further out to 48 hours, 72 hours, 5 days, there's other strategies you may use that may not cost as much, not be as complex and as volatile. So remember that. Anything 24 hours or less, you're getting into some serious money when it comes to identifying and implementing strategies. Business recovery planning, or BRP, basically refers back to that whole planning for the business side, all the plans, strategy, and solutions we put for the business operations of our company. Crisis management, strategic level. This is the senior management of the company. Here's how they manage and respond to an event. Business recovery plan goes back to that whole piece. It's really the business side and the plan itself of the procedures and steps in action a business unit would take to recover. Disaster recovery. I remember, that's how old I am. I remember when disaster recovery planning is what we called everything we did. And that got changed, thankfully, over time. So disaster recovery planning is really, it's really IT disaster recovery planning. So remember that. Disaster recovery planning only deals with IT, and it deals with the recovery of our critical technology assets. And the last piece I'll cover is just the recovery exercise. Once we're all done with this, we've done our BIA, our threat and risk, we've designed strategies, we put our plans together, we got our crisis team, we have all these pieces and parts together, we can now start to conduct exercises of the different pieces and parts to see how well we recover and should we ever have a disruption. And you should all be doing it, of course, in line with what you developed in the BIA, the very foundation. Okay, I thought this is always a really good slide. This is a slide really that came from the old Disaster Recovery Institute International model, and I still like that model, and it still has relevance. As you can see, up at the upfront is all the things we do before we start our business continuity program. We make sure we have all of our project planning and or initiative planning, making sure we know what we're going to do over time, our roadmap. We develop our policies and standards, and then you can see right away we have to get into our business impact analysis and our threat and risk assessment, because these two components, the BIA and the TRA, really give us our functional requirements, really tell us what business units, functions, and processes and dependencies we need, as well as what are the threats and risks that we need to be concerned with. And out of that, it really helps us to then define what's the appropriate recovery strategies. If we're in Phoenix, Arizona, there's a lot of natural events we don't need to worry about. So our strategies don't require us potentially to be out of state or be on a different coast, versus those in New York City, Florida need to look at, I need my data center on the other side of the country, or I need business units in completely different geographic areas. So the BIA and TRA, as you can see in this chart, very critical to designing the strategy and then designing our business recovery plans, our IT disaster recovery plans, our crisis plans. Those three components have a direct relation back to determining what's critical and what are our threats and risks. Once we're done, we then lead into testing, maintenance, continuous improvement, and then hopefully, if you ever have to execute, you'll have it all done. Now, when something typically happens, here's a typical recovery activity sequence, and it's very important to recognize. Here's all the things you do before an incident occurs. Fire life safety, the BIA TRA, which I talked about, our plans, our recovery exercises, making sure we back up all of our critical documents, data, and information. And when an incident occurs, a lot of people will think that our recovery time objective, or how soon we need to recover, starts immediately. That clock does not start immediately. As you can see here, we have to do emergency response. We have to determine, should we activate, should we not? Do we declare? So until we complete that situation evaluation, our recovery time objective that we determine in the BIA does not start. So once we do declare, then that clock starts, and all of the processes and functions we identified in the BIA and the timeframes that need to be recovered, then that clock starts and we start tracking, can we recover them in that appropriate timeframe we pre-identified. So one of the things that's still on here that I know over time is going to go away is, you can see when a situation occurs and we've yet to recover and relocate our units and recover our technology, we have to use our manual processes. What we see, of course, in today's environment, very few and far between have solid manual processes, not even hospitals. We see a lot of hospitals lack those critical procedures you need for manual operations, which you would think in an event of a technology disruption, they have significant patient care impacts. So over time, I think you're going to see less and less manual processes. But during that time frame, we enact our manual processes till we relocate our units, get them back up and running, recover our voice, our network, our data network, recover all of our hardware and systems. There's a lot of things that need to happen if you have a catastrophic loss of a facility. Once you get all that done, you're finally in recovery mode. You're not in perfect, you're still in degraded. But you can see how the BIA drives all of this process, really understanding the RTOs, the RPOs, and how does this all get recovered. If I have to be recovered in 24 hours versus 5 or 7 days, it's a lot different in the strategy, the solution, the complexity, and the cost. So what is a BIA? I think we kind of talked about this. Provides you with that clear picture of the criticality of your business units and what processes they perform. This in itself is pretty significant for a lot of companies. You have a company that's taken 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. In a lot of cases, they have an idea of all the processes performed, but probably not them all. So it really gives you a very clear picture. What do we do? When do we do it? And when would it need to be recovered so we can keep our mission, we can keep in alignment with our mission and minimize impact to our stakeholders? And I already talked about it. It's critical to your continuity strategy, and also the BIA also helps you identify all those dependencies and resources you need. What are the critical systems and applications I need for this process or function? Do I have a high reliance? Does that system run in-house, or do we have somebody outside provided as software as a service? What's the recovery point objective I have with that? Do I have a workaround for that system? And then the same thing goes for what internal dependencies do I have? What departments do I depend on internally in order to keep the process running? What external dependencies do I need? Do I need vendors? Do I need critical legal firms? What are those things outside the company I depend on? So you can see it gives you a very collective picture. What does a business do? What process they perform? What dependencies they have? And then again, at the end, what's critical or not. So identifying, first of all, the impact analysis, as I said, identifying the business processes within the organization. And that's not a lot of people think that's easy. We've had cases, and I will give you some facts, where a lot of times we've gone to folks that have performed their processes in their business unit for a long time, don't have a clear understanding of what they do. And I know that may sound crazy, but a lot of times they're so close to it And so in the weeds, it's hard for them to say, what are those concise processes we perform? Secondly, you'll find in identifying process, a lot of times people will give you activities, not processes. So you need to ensure that again, if you can roll up those tasks into a process. One of the things we always tell folks, if you haven't done a BIA in a very long time or never, limit your business units to only identifying the most top 5 most critical processes they perform, or even less. Because over time you can enhance that and get a greater number, but just keep it to a small number. Because again, the first time it's going to be complex, it can be confusing. When you come to identifying what's critical to your organization, let your business units know, hey, keep it to the top 5 or less in this first BIA or go around. Now, it also goes in identifying the dependencies, which I kind of already talked about. And very important, includes systems and apps, internal and external third parties. Knowing that is important. What we found now, especially with third parties, is IT wants to know that, enterprise risk wants to know that, supply chain wants to know that. They want to know who you interact with every day, not just internally, but also very importantly, externally, and how good are the continuity plans of those people as well. So the BIA starts to provide you with all this great information, not just for recovery plan development, but for other sources that people are looking for. Now, the big part of the BIA is this, which we're going to go into detail in a second, really determining what's the quantitative or dollar, as well as the qualitative non-dollar impacts of not performing these functions over time. So you're going to get to know in the BIA what's the dollar cost and what's the non-dollar cost. We'll go over those in a second. But what you do is you look at each process and function, and then you evaluate this dollar and non-dollar impact over time. And you find where that first significant impact occurs, and that becomes your RTO. So and you can evaluate these impacts over time. These impacts over time actually become your recovery time objectives. So you can well imagine if you're a hospital, you're going to start with recovery. You're going to start looking at timeframes such as 0 hours, 4 hours, or a casino. You're going to use the same timeframes, or a stock brokerage. You're going to look at very short timeframes to measure impact because again, they have short recovery timeframes. Whereas you may be a construction company. When we worked with very large construction companies, they can go 24, 48 hours without anything up. So can other organizations. So you need to consider what's the mission of your company and what timeframes make sense to start measuring impacts. All right. So we talked about this. Measures not only the loss of revenue, or added expenses in actual dollars, but also the impact on staff, customers, and investors at the peak processing time. So when you do a BIA and you look to measure what's my dollar and non-dollar impacts, you always will tell the folks you're interviewing that, hey, this is at your peak processing time, okay? And it's really important to know that so you design the appropriate strategy based on absolute worst case. So you don't get into the point that, well, we only did it at normal time or at the lowest possible processing time. You want everything evaluated at peak processing time. So some other key assumptions here. It identifies business impact when processes aren't available. And what I mean by that too is it's not the disruption to the business process or function we're trying to evaluate. It doesn't matter. It's not a natural event, a man-made or technological. We just cannot perform the process, and it cannot be performed at its peak time. So that's very important. It also determines how quickly you need to make that process available. So based on the impact, your template or your tool should be able to help you calculate how soon does that process need to be back up and running before there's a material or significant impact to the organization. That is key. And again, I already noted this, not concerned why a process is unavailable, only when it needs to be available. Whatever caused the disruption doesn't matter. We're just trying to determine what's the impact if it couldn't be performed over time. Okay? And then lastly, more and more important today is getting all that dependent data, information, technology, and other resources we depend on. That will help you drive everything else. Key statistic. The data from the business impact analysis, if designed properly, helps you already build about 60 to 70% of your recovery plan. So remember, that's really important. The data is not lost. It's not wasted. It should go directly to your recovery plan and helps build it quickly and timely and very efficiently. So that's the key about it, making an investment in a BIA. All that data is ready to be used for their plan. So why conduct a BIA? Again, creation of plans determines impacts, which you do need to know, and very important, provides that standardized process to identify those that are critical or not critical. And that way you can start to use this process over time. You can enhance it as needed, but it becomes the standard for identifying what is the criticality, what's the strategy and the planning we need to use in order to keep our company up and running. So some of the dependencies that we identify in our BIA: legal regulatory requirements, very important; service level expectations, how soon, what are expectations, answering calls, mailing specific customer inquiries back, or responding customer inquiries, performing transactions. All of those service level expectations your stakeholders have of you for each process and function. Dependent computer systems or applications. Now, this is the second piece. May sound easy, but in our BIAs, we always try to have an IT representative, who has a good understanding of what systems and applications that particular business unit may use. And they're very helpful because a lot of times, here's what we find. The business unit will have a different name for the system or an acronym, or they'll forget a system or application they use. Or again, they just need help in considering what all the applications I may need. So that's really important when you do your BIA and you're looking at the critical systems and apps, is make sure you have that IT person in there. Internal and external dependencies, again, back to who do I need internally, department-wise, as well as externally. And then lastly, vital records. Now, vital records can be, we still have a lot of people that have contracts in hard copy or other files in hard copy that are vital records. Vital records, remember, are those records that if I lose, I could have catastrophic damage or to my reputation, to ability to continue business. We still have a lot of people that have hard copy records. But remember, you also have electronic vital records in systems and other places, so remember that. So these are the types of things we track and why you should conduct a BIA. So when should I conduct a BIA? As I stated earlier, you should do one every 2 years. Now, a lot of the trends, especially for those of our clients and other organizations that are highly regulated, they're now being asked to conduct BIAs annually. This becomes a very time-consuming process, especially for organizations that have 50, 100, 200 more business units in their organization. So they have to come up with unique ways if they're required to do BIAs annually to keep them refreshed and up to date. Most clients, I would recommend, do it every 2 years. Now, we do have clients, because of the static nature of their business, they've decided and made a policy that they will do it every 3 years, and it works for them. So consider that. It's not a hard and fast, but depending on you're regulated or not regulated, and what you're required, and what makes sense for your company. But use the 2-year time frame as a baseline. Additionally, you may have, before you get to your next BIA in those 2 years, you may have significant changes to the business that may require you to update specific units that have significant changes happen to them. All new systems, maybe they got reorganized, they now acquired new processes, etc. So that's really important to remember that. We already talked earlier, BIA is always done as part of the functional requirements phase as you build new programs. So that's important. But you truly do need a BIA as part of your overall planning process. We've heard a lot in the press recently that BIA should go away. I'm not saying they won't in time. I believe in time we will change the way we do things. And again, every process can get updated and enhanced. So will it go away? I don't know. But I think we still need to conduct a BIA that still evaluates dollars, non-dollars, and does it in a way, again, that gives you the right information. There are some different ways to do a BIA. One of the ways that I've done it with smaller companies that works, but again, requires truly intimate knowledge of the company, as well as you need to have the right executives that can support you in this process. So whether you want to use a template or a system, the one other way to do it is basically to get everybody in a room, get all the key players in a room, and go through the organization and identify the critical units and what they do and timeframes for recovery. And it's basically, you will find most people do already know that. The BIA simply is designed to validate, because these people, the majority of the time we find, they know what they're doing when things need to be recovered. So you can do it in a non-standard way of just getting everybody in a room. And now, how many times have I had that work? Not many, because it requires a very specific culture to be able to do that, get in a room, come up with what's critical, not critical, and move on. Or you conducted the traditional way, which is going through this process we're mentioning here. Some tips and traps. Very important to remember. Each organization is different. So everybody thinks that I can use the same impact categories, I can use the same RT, recovery time objectives, or same recovery point objective categories, etc. That's not true. Each organization is different. You may use different impact categories to measure your dollar impact. Same thing as your non-dollar impact. So remember, everybody's a little bit different. So you may need to look at the BIA to what fits you. Use the process and methodology, but just fit it to use the right pieces and parts to make sure you get the right data out. A lot of times what we'll see when people, again, I again have a very specific rule when it comes to the BIA. The BIA is only designed to tell me what's critical and what are the critical resource dependencies I have. It's not designed at that point for me to already start to come up with strategies, et cetera. That I treat it as that's all it's going to do. The data that comes out will then lead to the recovery strategy, and I'll do that separately. So I try not to combine it and confuse the matter. Remember, always it's a point in time assessment. When I do the BIA, done as at this time and date, and things could change in 6 months. So just remember, it's always a point in time. We have a lot of clients will say, I'm not worried. The last BIA we did was 5 years ago. Well, I think something had to change in the last 5 years. So remember, that's always just a point in time, and it can be out of date in 3 months, 6 months, a week, depending on what's happening in your company. No single way to conduct, correct way to conduct the BIA or report its findings. Every culture is different. We have some clients, like I said, will want it done a very non-traditional way because that's what works for them. We have others that are regulated, and we got to go through a very detailed analysis of their functions and their processes, and we have to weight the impact categories and do a number of things to make sure this is the type of data they want out to validate and make sure it meets regulatory as well as auditing guidelines. As well as some may want a full report. Some now will want just a PowerPoint deck. So again, each client is different. Look at the culture of your company and how you'd like to conduct the BIA or report its findings. Very important to state here in conducting the BIA, though. You've got to understand it thoroughly. Know what you're going to do with your company, what it means, because when you're going to go out and interview people, people are going to ask, how much time are you going to take? What's it going to mean to me? How much time do I have to give you? What are my roles and responsibilities? What do I have to fill out, not fill out? And what does this mean when I'm done? There's nothing worse than going to a BIA session when you've already, as a consultant, put everything out, communicated, and you'll have people come in from the business units and say, why am I here? That can be sometimes just depressing when you try to do your best. So you have to be prepared for that. And remember, how does this BIA, how's it going to work with our culture? Okay. We've had one instance where a client came in and said, I don't know why I'm here. I know I'm important and critical, and left the room. So you have interesting things happen when you do these BIAs. So that's why it's so critical you thoroughly understand the process, how you're implementing it at your company, minimize the impact to those you're interviewing, and make sure at the end you're producing what management really wants. Keep it simple, number 5. I cannot stress this enough. There have been clients I've been at that I've been called in to correct the BIA process where it's taken a month or even over a year just to come up with what the BIA is going to look like. Keep it simple. What it's trying to do is just do a couple of things. This isn't rocket science. You're not trying to calculate how am I going to get this rocket to the moon. Just tell me what's critical, what isn't, and what they depend on. Keep it simple, and especially if it's your first one. Now, I won't get to my sales part till the end, but I'm going to tell you this. If you don't know what you're doing, either get coaching to help you if you need to do it yourself and you can't afford a full-time consultant, or if you can get a full-time consultant, get the right consultant to help you build the process, conduct it, and get the information. Because I'll tell you, if you don't do this BIA right, it's going to come back to hound you. And it's going to haunt you in some time down the road. Trust me on that. All right, number 6, I already talked about that. Don't expect everyone to be engaged or ready. They're not going to be excited about doing a business impact analysis. It's like a root canal, and they're showing up there. So you need to be prepared, ready. So when they come in to do your interview, and I will, again, highly recommend one-on-one interviews work the best versus just handing out spreadsheets for people to fill out or log into a system. You need to be prepared. Some may not be ready. Some don't care. So you need to be ready and engaged and enthusiastic and charismatic to run that BIA meeting in a way you get the data you want out. So important. All right. And the last thing to be prepared for is you do your BIA. Is sometimes you do all this beautiful work, you do an analysis, you come up with what's critical, what's not critical, you go present it to management, and you have the person at the back of the room that says, that recovery time objective is totally wrong, move it from here to here. Either make it more critical or less critical, and I don't care what the analysis said. So be prepared as always for management told you so. All right? So keys to the BIA success, so important. Scope the BIA appropriately. If you haven't done a BIA ever, or you haven't done one in a while and you need to do it again, nothing hurts by saying, hey, we're only going to do a small percentage of our organization just to validate the process, the methodology. Did it work right? Did we get the right data? Does the data that come out make sense for us? Scope it so you can be successful. Don't scope it to the point that I'm a new BCP person, BCM person, and guess what? I'm trying to do 100 business units on my first BIA. Scope it appropriately. Use the 80-20 rule. What 20% of the units I need to work with really provide are key to 80% of our mission. Okay? Develop that right data gathering plan. And what I mean by data gathering plan, it's really the BIA questionnaire. Am I going to use a tool? Am I going to use an Excel spreadsheet? Am I going to use a Word template? What's that data gathering plan to understand their critical processes and functions, their dependencies, their system needs, their vital records, their manual workarounds? What's that data gathering plan I can use that'll help me get the information in a way that's timely, effective, and management's happy with when I'm done? Okay. Now, a tool will not always fix your problem. If you don't have the right process and methodology set up for your BIA, you can have the best tool in the world. It's not going to work. Make sure you understand the scoping right, the process and the methodology, and then say, what tool will help me in this data gathering? Now, for those of you that do have sites all over the world, or you have many sites, you are going to need capability to aggregate that data by division or by group. So that's going to be really important. So consider that when you look at your data gathering plan. Spend time in scoping and understanding what you're going to do, understanding the process and what data gathering I need. Otherwise, you could be headed for disaster. Also, very important, management always wants objective data. But I'm going to tell you, when you do a BIA and you have them look at non-dollar impacts, it's based on subjectiveness. They're going to give you your best educated guess, and you need to trust it, especially if you get the right people in the room. Make sure when you do your BIAs, you're getting the right subject matter expert from those business units, that they're critical and they understand the business impacts. All right. Make sure when you're starting to do the BIA that you do have executive advice up front. Make sure as you scope it and you develop and you design, you have your management help you. Make sure that they're in sync and they understand what you're trying to do, what's expected of their people as you go to do your BIA. They're not suddenly somebody tells them, hey, why is Michael coming in and wanting me to do a BIA for my 10 business units? I have no clue why he's here. He's bothering them. Make sure management is thoroughly in sync, understands how you're going to do it, what's going to come out. We've had executives before. I'll never forget. Did all my work, advised everybody, communicated to all the executives. I got done, and one of the executives says to me, Michael, well, now that we're done with the BIA, what's left to do? There really isn't much, right? The BIA is the plan. So we've had those instances. So remember that. Get all this up front. Make sure you get everybody's ideas, comments, complaints up front. And at the end, you need to get sign off. This is the biggest problem we have. I go through this entire process. You spend hours, days, and months getting your BIA conducted, done, reported, and management doesn't sign off. And what that means is once they do sign off, that means that you can now go and build your strategies in a confident manner because they've agreed with what you said was critical and not critical. IT can take this and go out and design strategies for the systems you need. You need that agreement and sign off. So important. Now, so they will provide that validation because there'll be some things maybe they don't agree with. They want to move things around. And once you're done with this, take the results from your BIA once they're approved and signed off. Take them to IT and say, hey, here's all the systems we need and the timeframes we need for recovery. Go and align it with either what you have or don't have, and start to design strategies to recover them. So how can we help you before I get to questions? So how can MHA Consulting help? I think, one of the things we're good at is if you need the help, we can provide those right resources to help you conduct the BIA end to end if you need it. And a lot of clients will have us do that, especially in the first go around, because we can help their people learn, as well as then get them engaged so that over time they become the doers, we become the data entry people. Also, we've had clients that just say, Michael, I just need coaching. Help me with coaching. Provide some time frame to help me understand the BIA process and help guide me through it so I can get through it. And over time, it becomes my own. And then lastly, as I stated earlier, we have our own software as a service tools. So we have a number of tools. We also have our BIA on-demand tool. It runs in the Amazon Web Services Cloud. We've used it for thousands of BIAs to date. It allows you to quickly go in, set up your BIA with all the right categories and impacts and weightings, and allows you to go off and do your BIA, whether it's one site or many sites across the globe. So that's what I had today. Here's my contact information. I want to thank everyone for being here today and for taking your valuable time. Now I'll see if we have any questions. I'm going to open this up. Okay, let me. All right, we do have a question, and the question is this. One of the first questions we have is, can you talk a little bit about how mitigating strategies affect or don't affect how you analyze impacts? This is really important. So as I begin to identify what's my dollar and non-dollar impacts, you'll hear a lot of folks in the room will say, hey, but I already have a recovery plan for that. Or I already have another vendor I could move that to, etc. When you're looking at impacts, you always tell your business units, we do not want you to consider any recovery strategies, plans, or other mitigating controls you have, because we want to identify what is the true impact of not being able to perform that process over time. That's really important to get across at each and every interview you conduct. It's at peak time. It doesn't matter what has disrupted the process or function. And then lastly, we don't want to consider any mitigating strategies or controls you have should that be disrupted. We want the true impact to the company. Great question. Who else has some other questions? Any other questions from anyone? Well, I want to thank everybody for your time today. Again, remember, there's my contact information. Feel free to contact me with just questions about the BIA or the process. Look forward to helping any of you and all of you if I can. Have a great day, everybody.